What's going on, everybody? So this here is a Jeep Trailhawk 2016. It's got a 3.2 liter engine in it. We're going to be changing out the oil filter housing. They're notorious for failing on the 3.6 and the 3.2, so I'm going to show you how to do that. It's about a 3 to 4 hour process on average for someone kind of doing it for their first time. Someone else that's done it multiple times is probably a little bit quicker at it. But anyways, I'm going to show you how to change this out, and let's get into it. I'm not going to make this like a 3-hour video. I'm going to try and crunch it down into 10 minutes. So let's get at it. First things first, let's pull the cover off. Then we're going to disconnect and remove our battery. Now this cover here just pops up and off. It's just held on by some rubber tabs down below, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes these tabs get stuck to the top of the motor, so when you go to put your cover back on, you got to pull the rubber grommet off and put it back in the cover. Okay, battery, 2 top posts, 10 mil. You always want to disconnect your negative first. There's one, we're going to tuck that off to the side. We can go and pull this cover off if you have one. Take out our hold down. I'm going to use some power tools because I'm on a time crunch. So we're going to take that out. You can do this with some very basic tools. Try not to lose any pieces. Try and take your pieces and put them off to the side in a good location where you're not going to mix things up and it's easy to go back together. Pull the battery out. Okay, so down here on the computer, we're not going to fully disconnect the computer because sometimes these tabs here on the computer, they end up breaking. So what we're going to do is we're just going to unbolt it, and we're going to remove this plastic panel piece here. So there's a bolt way down in the front, and there's a bolt right there. Then you have 3 on the computer, and there's also a ground wire on the computer. Make sure you don't forget to put that back on when you assemble things. So the 3 bolts here are 10 mil. You use a ratcheting wrench. Try not to lose these, they're easy to lose. I'm going to put these nuts with the battery so I don't lose them. Disconnect our ground wire. Maybe take a piece of tape, put a piece of tape on this wire. So that way it's identifiable and we don't forget it, because it'll blend in with the rest of the vehicle. It tends to fall down out of place. So you want to make sure you put that wire back on. Okay, so now our computer moves. Down below here, there's another 10 mil on the side of this battery box. You could use a ratchet for this and a deep socket to get in behind and around the wire. I'm going to take these 2 bolts, I'm going to put them with my battery. On this piece here, it's not going to come up and out. Down on this side, if you look down in, there's a locking tab on near the bottom. Easiest way I find getting that out is with a pick. Use a 90-degree pick. Get down underneath here. So that'll come up and out. So this here is your locking tab. Grab it from the front, twist, get underneath of it, and then try and pop it out and up. Okay, reason why we're going to take this out, we're going to take these 2 screws off here so we can get in behind. There's a bracket. Then there's also a couple bolts back here. So these 2 bolts go into the upper intake, or there's 2 studs on the upper intake. We got to loosen the bracket so we can pivot the bracket over. So we got to move this up out of the way some. Okay, now this here, it's a little tight coming out. You can just get it, kind of set it off to the side here some. You don't have to fully disconnect it. This is out of the way. Now we can slide our wiring back a little bit. A little plastic piece in here that kind of goes over top of a stud. Right down in here, there's a bolt or a nut that holds this bracket to the upper intake. we're just going to loosen it. We're not going to take it fully out. That there is a 13 millimeter. I'm going to use a ratcheting wrench just because it's tight quarters. Get in here and loosen this up. That way the bracket can pivot. Okay, so there's a pipe here. We can probably leave that pipe there for now until we start moving this intake up. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect our wiring from up top. There's a little red locking tab. You're going to have to slide that out of the way. Little red locking tab, you're going to have to slide it back. There's a couple clips you got to undo to move the wiring back. Over here on the passenger side, we're going to remove this intake so we can get this piece up. So right here for these two clamps, we're using an 8 millimeter. Loosen those up. Take that off. Down here in the front, usually there's a clip in here. Clip's not there, so we're going to take this hose off of this. Okay, so right down in the top here, there in the center, right here, there's a black push pin clip. I have you could use a little screwdriver, a 90-degree pick or something. I have these type of pliers to remove the clip. Just a clip like this. That clip is out. There's a rubber grommet down in behind. We're going to loosen throttle body. Okay, so we're going to disconnect our clamp here from our throttle body. So now that wiggles. In behind there's a tab that you're going to have to pop up. That'll slide off to the side. Also right here there's a clip. You have to pop this up. We can disconnect this one. There, that's loose. Apologies about the bad camera angles. It's what I got to work with, and hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing. Now, majority out of our way, right here in the front, there's two nuts, 10 mil. One on either side of the front of the intake. Use a ratcheting wrench. You could use a down in the back here, there's a bracket on this side. Two 10 mils. Take those off. Okay, so there's a hose here on the top side of the intake. Take that off. Be careful with it so you don't break the pipe that comes off the back of the intake. Now that we have these nuts off, this bracket will move some. So hopefully we'll have, we might have to loosen this lower nut more. No, we'll have to take that, so that stud down there, we'll have to take that right off. Okay, so I guess I was hoping I was going to be able to sneak it past, but we're not going to be able to. This stud's going to have to come right out. So move our wiring out of the way some. Take this stud right out. So that's what our stud looks like on that bracket. Now this bracket's going to be loose, and we'll be able to lift our intake like this up and out. On the upper intake, we got 1, 2, and then 3, 4 for the upper intake. 5, 6. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 bolts right along here. We're going to take those out. Those there are 8 mil. I guess there's 7. 7 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now we can lift, slide that way. Take off the back one. There's one. disconnect the other tube down here. Now I'm not going to disconnect this here. I'm just going to flip it over. Flip it like this. So the tube pivots. I'm just going to move it off to the side here. Okay, now we have access to our lower. We're going to disconnect our injectors, and there's also some wire ties. We're just going to pop them, slide them up and out in the front and the back. Okay, just using a tool like this. Now you go get a pick and pop. There's locking tabs on your injector. So we're just going to get down there. I'm just going to pull up. They can be a little stubborn. Use the back side of my pick and push on the tab itself, the side of it. Then I'm going to pop the harness up and out. Okay, so that's up and out of the way. You're going to do the same for the back. Sometimes these little red locking tabs, they end up breaking. It's not the end of the world. Just try not to damage your connector on the harness. And if you wanted to be safe, you could get new locking tabs. So right here, we're going to disconnect our fuel rail. Pop this blue tab off. And there's like a button underneath. Push in, slide it out. We can take out our lower intake manifold. Lower intake manifold is these bolts down here. You do not need to take off the fuel rail. Just got to do the intake manifold, the lower section. So this part here is a T20. I'll start loosening things by hand. Just make sure things don't break. Now, this should lift up and out. There, so now that lifts right up and out. Fuel rail is still intact with our injectors. So we can move this off to the side. Down here, there's a red clip. Disconnect our wiring. Down here, there's a coolant pipe. We're going to squeeze the clamp, move the clamp. I'm going to use one of these. Just squeeze on clamps and stuff like that. You don't necessarily need one, but it definitely does help. Okay, so that can hold that clamp there for me. The bolts on this filter housing is an inverted Torx, and it is an E8. So I'm going to start things by hand. Now that we got bolts there free. Now it's going to be a little stiff because on this end there's a little tube that goes down. There's an O-ring. You gotta work it back and forth a little bit to get this side up and out. And you want to try and make sure it goes in straight afterwards. We can also lift this up a little bit and get better grip on our clamp. Now, as you can see the oil. There's something internally wrong with this particular part, where we're getting coolant in places where we're not supposed to. So down in the top here, we got a mess of oil and some coolant. We're going to go and take a rag and we're going to try and soak up some of this. So I got a turkey baster. Also use a shock back. Now that we get majority of everything cleaned out, we got everything here all cleaned up, and we're going to get ready to put this together. Now down here on the bottom there is an O-ring. You want to make sure this O-ring is lubricated, and when you set everything down into place, it goes down nice and straight. Because if it's on an angle, you can have risk of chancing tearing this O-ring or it coming undone, and then it's not sealing. So I'm just verifying that the O-rings here, they're all good. Take a little bit of fresh oil, just put a little bit of fresh oil on each one, and some on this O-ring here. So then when everything sets down into place, it all goes together good. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Also, they give us upper and lower intake gaskets, so I'm gonna go ahead and change those. Okay, so our upper and lower intake gaskets, some are on the bottom, some are on the top. Just gonna take I got a little pocket screwdriver here. Just gonna get down in underneath the filter, or the gasket itself. We're gonna pop these out. Just pick them up and out. There, one side is done. You flip it, and you want to make sure these are pressed down into place correctly, so when you actually flip things over and put things into place, your gaskets aren't hanging out or falling out or anything like that. So here I got a little bit of fresh oil. Just gonna dab some on my fingers. Just go around on these gaskets here, just so when things go together nice and smooth and squish the way they're supposed to squish. Now I can flip this back over and do the same thing to the other side. Add a little bit of oil. Don't need it a whole lot, just enough to get some on there. We're also going to add a little bit of oil on each O-ring here, right here, and then all on this. Okay, so with this here, you're going to want to get it down into place. You're also going to want to put this coolant line on first, because it's in a tricky spot. I'm going to disconnect my clamp. There. So that's coolant line is in place. Line up that stem. There you go. It slides right down into place here. Now those screws there are inverted Torxes. I'm going to start them all by hand. We're just going to snug them up a little bit here, and then we'll torque them. Okay, they're all snugged up. I'm going to go ahead and hook up my electrical. Okay, so the oil filter housing to engine block is 106 inch-pounds. Lower intake is 106 inch-pounds for the bolts. Upper intake 89 inch-pounds. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a torque wrench. We're going to go 106 inch-pounds. There. All at 106 inch-pounds. So our electrical is all connected. Filter housing is torqued into place. Everything up here for the intake ports and stuff are clean. Now we're going to go ahead and put on our lower intake and our fuel rail. So just verify that all your gaskets are still in place. Mine are. Good. Go ahead and we're going to set this down into place. Go ahead and start a few of these by hand. You don't want to move this lower intake around too much while you're setting it into place, just in case your gasket falls out. You use an 8mm. We're just going to snug things up. Now after you're done this, before you start it, you're going to want to drain the oil out. Do a fresh oil change. Okay, so the lower intake is 106. 106. There we go. Now our lower intake manifold is all bolted in, torqued down, according to spec. Now we're going to go and hook up our fuel injector harness, put our locking tabs back into place, secure our harness. Next step, we're going to go and put this down here. I believe it goes like this, right like that. Now you got to make sure this is not going to be interfered with that when you put your upper intake manifold back on. So the bolts are still in place. You're going to take this tube and get that down into place down here on the side. Oh, and then also the fuel rail line. The fuel hose. Make sure you put that back on before you get too far. Slide that into place. Our little blue locking tab. Put that back on. Okay. Make sure the pipe over here is back on. This bracket. Slide that up into place. We're going to go ahead and torque. Oh. So here I just kind of messed up. Down here in the front, I didn't get the studs into place. So we're going to unscrew everything here. There. So now we got our two studs back into the brackets in the front. That's in place. That's in place for later. Our wires are all up. Okay. Just gonna snug these down. So our upper intake, we're doing at 89 inch-pounds. Set my torque wrench here. Okay, so that's all torqued down. So now we have our intake upper intake manifold all in place. We got down here in the front, two nuts. Put these back on. We'll take our stud for the back. This one here is a little awkward because your wiring harness is in the way. We'll get our two nuts for the back. Hook our hose up back here. We can hook up this one here, put that into place. We'll wait to put that one into place because we need to get access to our clamp for intake tube. So we'll tighten these two 10 mil in the very back. So we'll tighten those two in the back for 10 mil, and we'll tighten two front ones that are 10 mil. Now we'll get our 13 mil down there. Use our ratcheting wrench. Now we will put this back into place, and we'll get our two nuts for on top here. We're going to put the rear section of our intake on. Now back, there's supposed to be a rubber grommet right here, stuck to the back side of the engine. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to put that back into place. I took a little bit of brake lubricant and I went around here and the boot on the intake, so everything slides together a lot easier. Okay, so we're going to get this tucked in behind here. Put your hose back in your clip here. Line this up nice and good. You don't want to fold that boot. Now this boot here can be a little tricky. It's in place. Okay, now on the back side, here's that rubber grommet. I'm going to line that up. Put our wire on the back side there. We're going to tighten up our clamp. So this here is an 8mm. You want to make sure that clamp is, this intake tube is attached to that clamp correctly. Okay, this sensor is hooked up, this sensor is hooked up. Hook our throttle body back up. Push our little red tab back in place. Bring this one over, put this one in place. There, that's good. Okay, intake is back on. All the wires up here are hooked back in place. Two nuts here are tight. The 13 mil down there is tight. The two on the back here is tight. We have our hose hooked back up over here. We have our hose hooked up there. Our crankcase ventilation tube is hooked back up to the intake over here. There. Now, just looks to be the intake tube over here. So it goes on like this. Snug these up. You don't got to go too crazy tight with them. Right here, that plastic push pin goes down in the front, up on the top. Put your pin in. Get our plastic piece back for our computer. This here is gonna just slide down into place. Line up like that. And then there's a bolt on the top and a bolt on the side. Okay, we'll get our 2 bolts for there before we bolt the computer right to it. There's one up here, one on the side. I'm going to use our 10 mil on my ratchet. That's snug, perfect. We'll put our 3 bolts on our computer, or 3 nuts, sorry. And don't forget that ground wire. It's the ground wire that we disconnected earlier that we put a piece of tape on. Make sure you put that back on. Perfect. So all 3 are in place. We'll move our battery cables out of the way there. We'll get our battery put in. Gonna put our battery cover back on. We'll bolt in our battery, make sure it's in place. That there is a 10 mil. Put our battery protector back on for cold weather and whatnot. We'll take this rag, leave the negative up. Put your positive on first. 10 mil. Now we can put on our negative. It's good and tight. Now we're going to verify that we got a filter in our filter housing. We'll verify that there's a filter in here. There should be. There is. Perfect. Put it back on. Now we're not going to start this right away. We're going to change the oil. And I'm going to top the coolant and stuff up. So I'm going to drain the oil, put fresh oil in, top the coolant up, then I'll start it and do my final check. Make sure there's no further leaks. There's no mixture of oil in the coolant, or no mixture of coolant in the oil and vice versa. And then we can put our engine cover back on. Okay, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below of how you made out, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.